Java with Joe the podcast is brought to you by Kemba Credit Union, celebrating over 90 years of quality service to our membership. Sponsored in part by First Choice Coffee, the official coffee of Java with Joe, and Real Vision. And now your host, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Westchester Liberty Chamber Alliance, Joe Hinson.
Thank you. We're with Sheree Paolello, news anchor for WLWT Channel 5 in Cincinnati. Welcome, Sheree.
Oh, I'm so glad that you invited me to be here.
And we're happy to have you. So you grew up in a place called St. Leon, which is in Dearborn County, Indiana.
Yes.
Where is St. Leon?
So it's, if you're heading west toward Indianapolis, as soon as you cross over Indiana, it's about 10 minutes into Indiana. My whole family's from the west side of Cincinnati, and I like to just say my dad went even farther west,
okay.
He loved having no neighbors, and so I started, elementary school on the west side at C.O. Harrison, then he moved to Northern Kentucky, then St. Leon, Indiana. So I graduated from East Central.
East Central, yes. Okay, and so I think one of your first jobs was you were a waitress at a restaurant, and then I know that you ended up being a bartender at the former TGIF Fridays in Tri-County.
I love that place. Yeah, so, I was a waitress forever. It's, when I was young, I think I was able to get a worker's permit at 15, and I worked at this little restaurant called the Fox's Den, which sounds like a strip club, I know, but it was a restaurant, a little country restaurant, and I worked there through high school, and then into college I started working at the Tri-County Fridays, and back then that was the hip place to be, and the flair and the suspenders and hats and all of that, buttons, and it paid my way through college. I say that all the time, and then I worked my way up and was able to bartend, and I would do that even when I very first started in television behind the scenes. I still was addicted. Well, not even addicted. I needed the cash because in news, when you first start out, you make nothing, virtually nothing. And so I was a bartender for a long time.
So as a plug with somebody here locally, I think our members and our viewers may know Dr. Abby Cook.
Oh, I love
her. Butler Tech.
We were the dynamic duo back in the day.
That's right. You worked with her,
We could make a
right?
lot of money behind the bar.
Yes, yes. And I know that you guys still stay in touch. So that's nice.
She's adorable.
So you ended up going to Northern Kentucky University, and I guess your first couple of years there, you were a cheerleader for the basketball team.
Oh my gosh, yes, that's a flashback. Yeah, so, I always tell young people that I didn't have a lot of options when I was young, where I was going to go to school. No one in my family had gone to a 4-year college before. And so I knew if I wanted to go to college, I was going to have to commute. So I went to NKU, and now I'm so proud that I went there. It's a great university, but when you're young, you think you want to go somewhere bigger, better. And so I made the cheerleading team there. We were, I think, the first team to go to the national championship for, cheerleaders back in the day out in California. And so, I did that for a couple of years, and then I was in a kind of a nasty car crash and had some injuries to my ankles, and so I think my junior year I finally stepped out because I was just limping all the time and couldn't tumble like I always did.
Oh boy! So, but you graduated with a degree mass communications. What is mass communication?
Yeah, so my focus was on radio and television with a minor in journalism, and I knew I wanted to be a journalist. I the minute I walked into a newsroom, I got the buzz. I just thought it was so cool that people are kind of running around. It's different every day. I always loved to write and read, but more than that, I really liked people. And so I knew that I just wanted to kind of tell people's stories, fight for the underdog. I still believe, even though news has changed, I know, I still believe in the public's right to know. And we debate constantly in our newsroom about, should we cover a story? How should we cover it? If we're going to cover it, we better get the other side, that sort of thing. Because as you know, journalism has changed a lot.
Absolutely. So your career started as a crime reporter for a TV station in South Bend, Indiana. Yeah. And then you moved from South Bend, I guess, to Dayton, and from Dayton to Charlotte.
Yeah.
And so you were obviously not an anchor yet, but basically doing a lot of different reporting in those cities. And I think during that period of time, I think 9/11 occurred. And from what I understood, that you spent, a week and a half at Ground Zero.
Yeah. So they call it general assignment reporting. So I was a general assignment reporter, but my focus was always on crime. And I know that sounds awful, but I really, to this day, I love Dateline. I love all those kind of, CSI kind of crimey shows. So I always worked closely with police officers and prosecutors, attorneys for, stories that I was working on. So when I went down to Charlotte, that was one of my first big jobs, where everybody in that newsroom was so talented. I remember thinking, why did they hire me? I'm still so, green and young. And the news director really believed in me. And when 9/11 happened, I was home that morning and I got a call from my news director, and he said, pack a bag, you're going to New York. And at the time, I was still young. I didn't realize the gravity of what was going on. I mean, obviously I knew it was a big deal, but we'd never in my lifetime seen anything like that before. So I was with a photographer and an engineer, and we were there for more than a week. And it was, to this day, the hardest story I ever covered.
Absolutely.
People were running up to me, I can vividly remember, with flyers in their hands saying, have you seen my daughter? Have you seen my son? If you see my wife, will you please let her know? Because in that first 24 hours, there was this kind of false hope that you thought people were just not able to communicate because of cell phone service and all of that. And then obviously, as the days went by, we realized that no one was walking out of that. And I can still to this day remember being literally, they drove us in on like the media, because you, at this point, within a few days, had media from all over the world.
Right.
So they drove us all in on a flatbed truck to Ground Zero and let us get off and just, stand at a distance and get our video and talk to emergency workers. And I just remember, firefighters and police officers, just because they were digging through all the rubble, hoping for survivors. And, some of them were, of course, were too emotionally, physically worn out to talk to us, but some would stop and just say, I lost, countless brothers and sisters in this. And then as the days went on, it's the smells and all of that you'll just never forget. I say to young people all the time, you really don't understand what our country went through. And I think for me as a reporter, I always took my job seriously, but I realized in that moment that truly, like, the nation is watching and living on every word that you say, right, that night. And I mean, it was long, long days. I'd get up, I'd do reports for the morning show, for the evening show, but you just realized that it was an important job you had. And I felt that same sense of responsibility during COVID, I think. I always take this job very personally. I get very offended when people will say, oh, fake news, or I don't watch the news anymore. And look, I get it. I mean, I get that some people, it's heavy and it can be very depressing.
Right.
But that'd be like me saying, well, I don't like Coca-Cola, or I don't like where, Chemical Credit, whatever it is.
Sure.
So I take it personally because I do still believe in fighting for the little guy, exposing corruption and those sorts of things. And again, 9/11 was still to this day the heaviest.
So you went there. Had you been to New York before?
Yeah, I'd been there before, but once or twice, and was for a weekend. And I always thought when I got into news, and I wanted so much to escape St. Leon, that I thought, I want to work in New York and Chicago, Even when I was in Charlotte and came home to Cincinnati, I thought it was just temporary. I was here for a 2-year deal, and then I wanted to leave. But then everything changed, Then I was getting older. I wanted to be a mom. Channel 5 was so good to me. And I kept growing that I realized, I get to still do what I love and also have a good life.
Yes.
Good personal life.
Yes. Well, your career was close to us here, and you went to Dayton, then you went to Charlotte.
Yeah.
And then in, 2002, you got a phone call from WLWT. Was that a surprise?
Yeah, so the funny thing was before I went to Charlotte, so that would have been like 1999, 2000, I was getting offers kind of all over the country. In this business, in the beginning, you can't get anybody to hire you, and then suddenly, you're getting offers from all over the country, and I was kind of willing to still go anywhere. But Channel 5, at the time, the news director said, "I have too many girls who look like you already." You know, back in the day, you could say that. And I was like, "Well, this isn't like natural blonde. I can be a redhead if you want." But they didn't hire me. So I went down to a bigger job in Charlotte.
Okay.
And my ex-husband, my now ex-husband at the time, we commuted back and forth. I was living in Charlotte. He was living back here in Cincinnati. And we'd fly back and forth to see each other or drive and meet in the middle. And so I knew, I needed to come back here, and then we needed to go somewhere together if I was going to leave. So Channel 5 knew that, I would want to come home to Cincinnati.
Okay. So they knew
2
ahead of
years
time.
later,
So,
then they
okay.
called me, and I was like, okay, this will work.
So you mentioned that you got the bug when you were at Northern Kentucky University, and you said, wow, this is what I want to be. So you were a reporter, but then in 2004, you became a news anchor. And so how did that come about, and was that basically your goal?
It's funny because no, it wasn't my goal. Some reporters will say from the get-go, I just, I want to be an anchor. And I kind of hate that term because or that, mentality. Because I always say, I believe that the best anchors were excellent reporters.
Mm-hmm.
So you've been in the field, you've made sources, you know the community, you know the issues that are important to whatever city you're living in. And so initially, no, I did not want to anchor. I just wanted to be an awesome reporter. But then in 2004, I had my first child, my oldest son, and I was on maternity leave. And this rumor, this is some inside scoop, this rumor started to kind of buzz around the newsroom that I wasn't going to come back, that I just was going to stay home. And there was an opening on the weekend anchor position. And so my boss at the time called me on maternity leave and offered me that job. And of course, it's better money, that's the reality. It's like not only are you not out on the streets every day, it's kind of a better gig, right? I always call it, it's like a house cat a little bit. But I had the best of both worlds because it was funny. Initially, I anchored the weekends, but it was only for a couple of months. And I think the news director at the time kind of missed me on the streets full time. So he said, why don't I give you the Monday through Friday? You can do the 5 o'clock news. I was part of the first dual female anchor team ever in Cincinnati with Sandra Ali.
Yeah, I remember.
I'd do the 5 o'clock news anchoring, and then I'd go out and turn stories for the 11. And so I had that edge, that crime reporter that, I just loved, I was still passionate about, and I'm still passionate. I still have tons of sources and people that tip me off to things, and I love you guys for doing that because I love it. I really, there's nothing that gets me going more than feeling like we're breaking a story and we're ahead of our competition.
Yeah,
And I think
absolutely.
that's what sets apart the people. I always say to young people, don't do it for the glamour, because if you're like, oh, I just want to be on television and I think, I'm pretty or whatever, that gets old like within literally weeks, because it is a grind. This is not a glamorous business, especially being a beat reporter. I mean, you're out at fires,
Right.
you're covering, car crashes in the middle of the night, and you're meeting people on the worst day of their lives. And so often people don't want you there, right? You're there
right,
when,
right.
there's been something horrific happening.
Right.
And that's when I always say that I think what set me apart from other people wasn't that I was smarter. I was super intimidated when I started anchoring at Channel 5 because Sandra Ali had gone to Northwestern. She was, very smart, supernatural, didn't really have to work hard at looking good and being good and solid as a news anchor. And I was a little insecure that I had gone to NKU and had commuted back and forth, right? But what I realized, I think, over time, and now that I'm in my 50s, is that I just outworked people. I came in early, I stayed late, I turned 2 stories instead of 1 story, and people trusted me. To this day, I have sources that I have had in Cincinnati for 20 plus years,
that's
and they
awesome.
know I will never burn them. I won't even tell my co-anchor or my colleagues who tips me off to stuff, and I think that's important. They know that I'll never reveal where I got information.
So as you're talking about, obviously, your time here and your different experiences, 22 plus years now in the business.
Yeah.
So
Just at Channel 5.
Yeah,
Just at Channel
yeah.
5 more than 22
yeah.
years.
So let's talk about the experiences that you've had and how you've seen news over the time here, especially in Cincinnati, has changed.
It kind of breaks my heart a little bit, because I am such a news junkie. Look, I'm like so many of you out there. I hate what's happened to journalism. It used to be a job where people, really revered you and respected you and knew if you said something that it was true. And, I can't watch national news like I used to. When I was that young rookie reporter sent off to South Bend, Indiana for that first job, I would work out in the morning at the local gym, and I'd be on the treadmill and had my whatever at the time headphones that plugged into something, and I would look at every network station. I constantly was, wanting to know what was going on in our community and across the country and world, and you knew it was pretty much fair. And now everything has shifted where, if you go to MSNBC, it's going to be far left. If you go to Fox News, it's far right. I mean, so I know that news has changed. And what I always say is that I am, and I think the majority of the people in my newsroom at the local level, fighting to at least try and be as fair as we can. Sure. And I always say to young people that I shouldn't know how you vote. I shouldn't know where you stand on social issues. I love it when I get emails from both sides, especially during a political season, which we just got off of, where people are like, oh my gosh, you're so, did you wear red because you're a Republican? Or, oh my gosh, you're so far left. And I'm like, well, I guess I'm doing my job because they don't know where I stand on things.
Sure.
So that's what's changed so much, that, 30 years ago, you would never, unless it was a story where, of course, you're like, you're crushed because
Sure.
a bunch of teenagers had been killed in a crash after prom, or, an animal had been so abused that, of course, you want to show your compassion. But you never, ever, ever would show how you felt about some sort of political issue
Sure.
or social issue that was going on. And that is where people have lost credibility, and social media.
Yes.
I say all the time, be careful what you put on social media.
Absolutely.
It's very easy to get sucked into, the hate, or, the little, people will flat out ask me, hey, so what did you think about this? And I'll just say, I don't comment about those sort of things. Now, if it's a horrific stabbing and a kid from UC is, shot, trying to get into his car that's being broken into, of course you
Sure.
care. And I think that's what, after all of these years, I don't think I've ever lost that. My heart aches for the families that we cover who, whether it's lose a young mom to cancer or a horrific, mass shooting. The day you lose your compassion in this business, the public sees it. They think, right. Don't you even care, what's going on? And I think part of it is I am a mom, and I have a family here. And so I care so much about this community that I've grown up in. But I do think that whether I was here or in Chicago or New York, I'd be the same person.
Sure.
And I think the day that I don't feel like that, I need to get out of this business.
Sure.
For sure. I often, Joe, say a prayer for the people who I cover on my drive home. I'll drive with the radio off and just, I was raised Catholic, and I remember I was really struggling with this when I was getting married the first time. And the priest who I was close with said, we need good journalists, Sheree. Because I was really conflicted. I said, look, I'm on somebody's worst day. My job is to go get them to talk to me.
Sure.
And he was like, just don't lose that. We need good people out there who are fighting for the right thing. And over the time that I've done this, I have done some really good, and my team, we have done some great journalism still that has made a difference in this community, that has exposed bad doctors, bad companies who were covering things up. And those are the times where I think, you know what? Local news will always be relevant. National news will always be relevant. Sure. But it's going to change, and it is changing, and there will be fewer of us.
So early in your career, you wanted to go to the bigger markets. They say Cincinnati is a small city, but in a lot of ways it comes across as a big city. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you talk to people in the industry across the country. You've seen Cincinnati change over the time that you've been here. You grew up here, left here, came back again. Is it what you see here pretty much parallel that to the larger cities and across the country?
Yeah, I definitely think that news has changed across the country in every market. I think what makes Cincinnati different is that we are, you kind of alluded to it, we're a top 30, top 35 television market. Number one is, of course, New York. But when it comes to caring about our community, I think Cincinnati is a lot like Pittsburgh and those sort of cities where, people are born here, live here, die right here. We love our community. And so I think that's what makes news a little different here, that people trust and want to, I remember my news director, I'm sorry, is going to hate that I say this, but when I started at Channel 5 in 2002, my dad, who raised me, would watch my story. I was usually, like the first story out of the gates at 11 o'clock, and then he'd flip back to 12 because he was so used to watching Channel 12. That was our family station. And that literally happened for years until finally he was like, you guys aren't so bad over there at Channel 5. Now, part of it was our problem at Channel 5. We had a revolving door of anchors and it wasn't stable. After Norma and Charlie had left, there was a lot of turnover for our meteorologists and for our news anchors especially. Sure. And now I think for the last 15 years, we've really been solid. Yes. And now I think that it's the opposite. I think a lot of people, and I love you who are loyal viewers, that people trust us. And now Channel 5 is the #1 station and website that people turn to for news.
Well, and you've obviously supported that initiative because you married your best friend and co-news anchor.
I know, it's so
since
weird.
2012, Mike Dardis in 2019. Yeah. So is that unique in your industry?
Definitely. I definitely think it's unique. It's not unique that people are married within the news world because it is such a different, it's like doctors being married to nurses and things, right? And an emergency where, cops being married to other police officers and firefighters. But it is weird, of course, to have two main anchors married. I know other stations where they've had meteorologists and the main anchor married. It's certainly, I think unconventional, but I will say I'm so grateful because he gets it. When we got called in a lot this summer, when former president or President-elect Trump was shot, we were called in on a Saturday night. I was out to dinner with my mom and my stepfather, and we get it that we've got to go in. We know that's a big night. Sure. 2 weeks later, President Biden was stepping out of the race. We knew on that Sunday we needed to go in. And I think when, to the credit of our former spouses, it is hard to understand this business and to live with someone who is constantly kind of their mind is sometimes somewhere else.
Sure.
I get up in the morning and after I get my kids off to school, I'm reading, it used to be the newspaper, but now of course it's my phone. And I love staying on top of what's going on a Saturday night when I get a tip that a suspect has been arrested in the Mount Adams stabbing. I'm going to call that in. I'm going to try to be engaging with my source in the station to let them know what's going on. That's why I think that's part of what makes me great, but it's also hard to live with someone like that.
Well, absolutely. Well, when listening to you, obviously you have a passion for what you do. Mike has a passion for what he does. In situations like that, you want to be called in. Yeah. You are ready to go. And you would be disappointed if you weren't there.
And what we always say to younger people, yes, it's a grind. And yes, there are days where, look, I never thought I would love being, I was so consumed with my job when I was young that I knew I wanted to be a mom someday, but I didn't know I would love it like I do. And now I can honestly say I love being a mom more than I love being a journalist. And someday I will be fine when it's my turn to step down. But we always say to the younger people that, look, you want to be the one called in, because when you're not the one called in, that's not good.
No, it isn't. No, you're absolutely
so
right.
I appreciate that my boss values me and knows that if he sends me out, that I'm going to try to get even more information, and that he wants to call me in when there's something big going on.
Absolutely. And to the viewer, it makes a statement. It basically says that the station recognizes that this is important, that if it's a weekend or during the day when you're normally not there and you're called in, that's important.
And I always like to clarify, that is not to say that our weekend crew
Correct.
Or morning crew, whenever it is we get called in, that they are not solid and awesome and so good at this job as well. We're all equals. It's just more like, to your point, that I think our news director wants to say, this is that important that we're calling our night team, our main team in.
Main team, right. Yeah, absolutely. So in listening to you, let's think in terms of what is the most challenging part of being a news anchor. And how have you been able to manage that over the years?
So I think two things. I think being a woman aging on television is tough. I would be lying if I didn't say that it's not something that, I'm conscious about. It's hard to, realize that this business is getting younger and younger. You would never see a 23-year-old news anchor, where now you see that sometimes,
Sure.
on a weekend shift or filling in or whatever. I mean, I didn't even ever think in my 20s I would get opportunities to anchor, It just was not accepted back then. So that's certainly tough, to be an aging woman, to gain weight, to have wrinkles. I think men get more distinguished, and women, we're trying to fight time. But the other thing is, quite frankly, is social media and the access to us that we didn't have when people didn't have when I started out in this business. It used to be, in 1997 98 when I first got my first reporting gig, if somebody had a complaint, they had to look up in the phone book, call the station, maybe not get a hold of somebody, or there wasn't even email. Where now they not only have our direct email address and can sometimes be connected to our phone, on social media, they can tag you and say if they don't like you. I mean, people say the most awful things sometimes. Now, I always try to, remind myself that 99% of the messages that come to me on social media are great, and people are so kind to me, and I love you, I feel like you're my family, I watch you every night, and where'd you get that dress or whatever. But then you get those just, people without a face on their profile, and they say something awful. And I mean, I'd be lying if I didn't say that those cut. I mean, those get you sometimes where you're like, wow, it kind of catches you off guard when you get one of those messages. That's what has changed so much.
Absolutely.
And I guess also how fast we do news, we really try, even if we see that our competition, if we know something has happened and we haven't gotten a second source to confirm it, but we see that our competition's putting it out there, we really try to say, slow down, let's just make sure we get it right instead of just trying to beat the competition. That has changed the game a lot.
Absolutely. So being from this area is pretty unique also. And so how has your relationship with your audience evolved over this period of time, the 22 plus years you've been here?
I think that people in Cincinnati love Cincinnati people. I think they love that, when there's somebody from here that's giving them the news. And so I think people have been so good to me. I think they maybe have seen me grow. I remember the very first time or two I anchored, my dad, who is brutally honest, Italian, called me after and was like, my God, that was awful. I counted 8 mistakes. Can you not read a teleprompter? So I think that, Cincinnati people like that maybe I'm from here and they've watched me grow up. And maybe they've also, seen me change so much. They've seen me have my kids and, go through pregnancies and all of that. I think that's what, Cincinnati, even though we are a bigger city, it still feels very small town that way. And it's not to say that they don't like people who are outsiders. My co-anchor Mike is not from here. He's from upstate New York. He came from Seattle. And I think he saw this as a stepping stone. And he will say, it wasn't me. He knew that he was going to stay here long before we were together, but he fell in love with Cincinnati. He said, I've worked in big cities. He worked in Philadelphia and was the main sports, director, and worked in Seattle, bigger cities. But he says this just feels like a big city, but you still have that great quality of life.
Absolutely. Well, you can tell that any chance that Mike has to talk about sports, he loves that opportunity.
He does. Sometimes too much. I'll hear him on Twitter, debating with people. I'm like, oh my gosh, here we go. He's at it again.
So one of the things that you mentioned that you really enjoy about, obviously, the platform you have is being out in the community and giving back to the community. Talk a little bit about that, because maybe people that don't know you as well don't recognize the time that you put in besides just being on TV.
Yeah, I think some people would say oh, it's just part of the job. Well, it's not part of the job. I mean, we work long hours as is. And, to be totally honest, it started years ago when I came back to Cincinnati and when I got one of the anchoring positions. And I realized that people weren't watching Channel 5. We get the nightly ratings. We could see that we were the dog station at the time. I was like, how can I get people to watch me? If my own dad wasn't committed at that point, how can I get people to watch me? And I thought, okay, It's a win-win. I'm going to get out in the community in front of big audiences, help a local charity, and then at the same time maybe win some people over, because if they see me in person and like me, they'll turn to Channel 5. So that's certainly, I think, benefited me. But then it just also, to me, is almost like medicine for the soul, because we do cover so many horrible things on a daily basis that when you get in front of, a great positive organization or charity, you realize that there are so many more good people doing good things than the horrible people doing bad
Absolutely.
things.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to bring up, a plug for an event that we have at UMC, is Women of Excellence. We just had our event in November of 2024, and you've been with us several times, and how much we appreciate you being a part of that, and that you basically have become part of the fabric of the event itself. People really enjoy having you. You enjoy being there, and it just kind of fits together so nicely. And so I'm sure that you put that time and effort into the others that you get involved with. But, we see that in our community, so thank you for that.
You're welcome. And it's one of my favorite events. I say it every year because, first of all, I love girl power. I love seeing, amazing women making a difference in their community. And I'm blown away because I'll go to that event and I'll think, maybe I'm not doing enough, because these women are really inspiring.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what you do, what you say has an impact. And so, what is it that you believe that local news has in a way of an impact in this community, especially since you play a role in that, and this is your community in which you grew up in. So, obviously news does play an impact in, where we're at today and where we're going in the future.
Yeah, and I think that's why I say that I believe that local news and news will always be relevant. There may be fewer stations. I think that's coming. And that's what our corporate bosses believe, that local news and national news will always be relevant. People want to know what's going on. I mean, if a teacher's been arrested from your kid's school, if, there's been this horrific fire, a few blocks over, you want to know, did everybody make it out okay? What happened over there? Yeah. I mean, I'll get, messages, people in my community, I live in Mason, and if the SWAT team or ATF and the feds have been surrounding a home, but yet that information's not out there yet, people will email me, hey, do you know what was going on like 3 streets over? And so I do think that's the impact, that people always will care about what's going on in their community. I just think, unfortunately, the way we get it, and we're seeing that, is changing.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've worked in other markets. So you have, by comparison, an opportunity to look at the other markets. What makes this tri-state region so unique from what you've seen in your other markets you've worked in?
I just think because it's not so transient. So when I went down to Charlotte, I loved my news director and assistant news director and the station I worked for. They just made me better. Everybody in that newsroom was like a John London, a Curtis Fuller. They were all veterans. But I didn't love the city. It was very, it's very, very transient. It's the banking mecca at the time. And so, people would come in from different various banks. You just didn't get that kind of hometown feel. And maybe it was because I wasn't a hometown girl there. Yeah. I think that's what makes Cincinnati different. I think that people take great pride. We always make fun of ourselves that, when people say, what school did you go to? We're talking about your high school and not your college. Yeah. But I love that about this community. I think it's that, pride that people have in where they grew up in. And I feel that to this day, that my whole family, my aunts, my uncles, my parents went to Oak Hills, and my grandmother until just, October of 2024, lived in Cheviot. And I still loved going over there, even though I feel like the county engineer sort of forgot about the west side because there's no easy way in or out. But I'm still proud of that. I'm proud that my family, and it's, I think, why I always say my dad's motto is don't forget where you came from. And the West Side has changed a lot. There's been a lot more crime that's infiltrated some of those communities, and poverty in some areas of the West Side. And I still live by that motto of don't forget where you came from.
Absolutely. So the news cycle here is one in which you have to prepare for every day. So it appears from just listening to you that what you do is like 24/7, 365.
A little bit.
So how do you prepare for that as you go on the air in the evening, especially when news happens in your own backyard?
I think it's that you just always have. Now, look, the internet has made it easier. I have all my apps set up so that I'm getting alerts from not only WLWT, but CNN and Fox News. And I want to know when something's going on. And to me, that's what, look, it could easily consume you. I think I have found such a good balance that when I'm home, I try to really be present. But if I see something big's going on, I'm going to make sure our station knows about it, or if somebody calls it with a tip. It's difficult. It's difficult to kind of juggle both, but I think that's how it is with any business. When you care about what you do, whether you're a police officer, a nurse, a teacher, I can't even imagine the amount of emotion that teachers take home with them if they've got a couple of students who are maybe struggling or they're worried about their home life. So I just think you have to balance it out, and I think that's what I've been able to do over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking back over your career, what do you consider your proudest achievement?
I think one of my proudest moments was, yes, I covered 9/11, and that was one of my hardest stories ever. I remember I came home from that, and I immediately went to Cincinnati because my ex-husband was here, and I spent the weekend. And I never am the type of person to call off for like emotional whatever, but I, on that Sunday, called my news director and said, can I have one more day on Monday, because I'm kind of messed up from that. It was really heavy. But one of my proudest moments, a few years ago, there was a doctor in Mason. Actually, he has been on the run. His name is Dr. Atik Durrani. He was performing unnecessary back and spine surgeries all across greater Cincinnati. And at the time, he fled the country. Right now, he's still on the run. He may never be found. But what I found was there were about more than 500 patients who had been filing these civil lawsuits to try and just get financially reimbursed because they were disfigured, many of them. Women with, crooked necks or backs that were in the shape of an L. Horrific stuff. And at the time, they wanted us to do the story, but not to necessarily, we had covered the doctor who was on the run. They wanted us to go after some of the local hospitals who they were claiming looked the other way. They knew this hospital. He was I think, number 2 largest charging doctor, profiting doctor in all of greater Cincinnati. And they wanted us to go after these hospitals because that's where the money was going to be. And millions had been spent by local hospitals fighting them in court. And initially, my news director and GM were kind of like, let's not touch this one. And I really fought for it, and they believed in me. And my partner, Mike, took it on with me because there was a lot of digging to go through. And we exposed some local hospitals, and they ended up paying out and settling with these people. And that feels good because they can at least pay their medical bills off, right? They can at least have enough money to go to the doctor now for their lifelong, life-changing injuries. So that was probably and we won an Edward R. Murrow Award.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your rewards, because rewarded for obviously the job you've done. You talked about digging in, and that was something that both you and Mike won. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. So that was an Edward R. Murrow Award. It's the highest honor you can get and recognized for journalism, and so we both received that, as well as of course WLWT, and then we've won our team has won countless Emmys, and I've won several for stories I've done, for anchoring that I've done. I laugh. I've given some of my Emmys away to the people that I've done the stories with, because I feel like they're the ones who really deserve that award, that they were willing to share their story with me. And so it's not about the recognition in that way. It feels good when you feel like this business still matters and the work we do still matters. And that, when you're competing against, my competition, it's not just Cincinnati, it's Columbus, it's Louisville, Lexington. There are some amazing journalists, and to win out over all of them is a pretty big honor.
Well, it says something when you're a professional and you're awarded the top of the line awards for your industry, and especially when you decide you want to come in and do a story, and you have the opportunity of showcasing the fact that you're Emmy award-winning anchor. People listen, I would think, right?
I think so. I think so. I just think that people hopefully trust me, that they know when they say don't do something or do something. I mean, you get people who talk to you off the record, or they don't want their identity or released and shown, and they know that I would never go against that.
Sure, absolutely. So what skills and experiences from your long career would you say are the most essential for someone who wants to pursue a career and being a news anchor?
I think you better be willing to work hard. I think you better be willing, to have thick skin, because it can be very critical these days, and that's tough. And then just, obviously love meeting people and communicating and sharing people's stories and being a good storyteller. I mean, look, most stories that our reporters do on a given night get 1:30, right? Maybe 2 minutes. And people, they're sharing with you, 500 facts that have happened over a span of time that you've got to condense into 1:30. That's hard to do. So, and to still make it, relevant and get their point across. And so I think that's it. You just have to be, hardworking, a digger, have compassion for people, like to tell people's stories, and also want to, I always say, like, be a reporter. Let's be a reporter tonight, not just be handed a story where everything's in a press release. Ask questions, go knock on doors, go talk to people, and find out what's really going on.
So journalists that want to make an impact in their community, we've seen your plan and how it's worked for you. What advice would you give them for if you want to be really impactful, someone who is recognized, that you feel their pain, you understand, because you're living it too, you're out there in the community? What would you recommend?
I think it's exactly what you said. Get involved, get in the community. Some of the people who I think are most revered in greater Cincinnati, whether it's now or in the past, who were journalists, they were very involved in their community. Curtis Fuller does endless community events. I mean, I just absolutely adore him. John London's been here forever. He was I think a radio reporter, a print reporter before he ever was on television, and we're involved in our communities. Nothing makes me crazier than when I hear an anchor or reporter go, well, I mean, I'm not from here, so, this is how I feel about a sport, a win, or, I'm not from here, so, I don't know what's going on. It's like, why would you announce that to people? Get involved and know the story you're covering.
Absolutely, absolutely. So one of the things that comes out, I think, loud and clear as we talk is character, your character. And I've heard you say this more than once about the importance of being compassionate. Understanding, I think, what I hear from what you're saying is obviously to the story you're covering, but also to the people who are in the field that are in your industry, and understanding their jobs and how hard it is because you've done it yourself. And how important that is, to the point that as you're recommending somebody who is in that career, if they have lost that compassion, maybe it's time for them to get out.
Yeah, or burning sources. I mean, we've had issues where we've had reporters who are just kind of climbers, and they'll do something that I wouldn't think is necessarily ethical, that I wouldn't do. I don't like someone thinking they're coming in for an interview for one thing or a news conference, and then you ambushing them with something else. I mean, that to me is where your character comes in. And my dad used to always say, you only get one name. And quick little backstory, Paolello is not exactly the easiest name to say. And so when I knew I was going to be a reporter, I wanted to be like Sheree Scheffler, like some alliteration. And my grandfather and my father were just so offended that I wouldn't, take Paolello. And I now that I'm older, I get it. Yeah. Because I do think you only get one name. And if, people don't feel like they can trust you, if they feel like you're kind of a shyster, and that, or a police officer is like, hey, you didn't hear it from me, but yeah, that person ended up dying. And you say, yeah, police officer on the scene told me they were, it's like, you're getting, they're trusting you. You don't want to get people in trouble with their job. And so I think that's where your character comes in. And it's whether you're a journalist, and goodness knows we see it now where, on the national stage where, you think you've got journalists calling people names, politicians, and things like that. And I think it doesn't matter what someone else's field is. I know that most politicians get into it for the right reasons.
Yeah.
They think they can make change, Now, whether they go off onto a different path that you don't agree with, but I think initially when you do community service and you're a public servant, you initially get into it for the right reasons.
Absolutely. And also something you touched on before, because obviously you're a trained professional. So you're reading the teleprompter, you're covering these stories, but you also have feelings about these, and that is that something that's really tough to deliver, that you have to deliver, takes its toll. And on your way home, the advice that you got, which you obviously attuned to, is that there's times where you will say a prayer for the person or the family that you've covered in tough situations.
And look, there are times where I have really strong beliefs or disdain for somebody we're covering. They've murdered multiple people or sex assaults, crimes against children, crimes against animals. I mean, I do a lot of charity work in those fields, and I've had family members who've been impacted by abuse, sex abuse, physical abuse. I'm super passionate about those issues, but until someone's convicted, it's my job to just give information. And while we can obviously all empathize for any victim, when someone says they're raped, we can't just assume that they're a victim, right? Because we've also seen the flip side where there's false allegations. So it's a delicate balance. And there are definitely days where it weighs on me, where I go home at night and I'm almost like I have to shake my head because I can't get it out of, I can't unsee. There are times where the information we're giving you and the video we're sharing with you is just a piece of what we've seen, because some of it's so bad that we can't even say it or air it on television.
Yeah, I hear you. And lastly, you've mentioned your dad a lot in our discussion today. And one of the things that he's mentioned is don't forget where you came from. Never forget where you came from. And I had mentioned to you that was something that the late Paul Brown would say to his players when he started with the Bengals back in the late 60s. But how profound, and also obviously something you haven't forgotten either.
I just, I see so many people in power that really came from nothing, but money takes over, power takes over, and they forgot where they came from. So my dad used to say that when I was, younger, not even, when I was at this stage. And it just always made sense to me, because I still have family members and friends who really struggle, that weren't as fortunate to have the path that I have. And, yes, we all, want to achieve more and like nice things and all that. But, I'll sometimes see it with athletes, with successful people when I go to these charity events, where you think, I know you came from nothing, and you are, so nasty to people. And I just don't understand that,
Sure.
So I always say to my boys and to my husband that if something happens to me, what I want on my headstone. I want that on my headstone, because I like to think that no matter how much success I've had, and I'm so grateful for it. I mean, I know in this day and age it could vanish at any moment. There could be an open microphone situation where you say, I mean, we're in this cancel culture environment. So I know it could end at any time, and I just am so grateful that I've gotten to do what I love for so long. My one girlfriend said to me one time years ago, the difference, and she was in nursing high up, she said that the difference between us, Sheree, is you have a career and I have a job. I got into nursing because I didn't know what else to do, and you love what you do, and I do. I still love what I do. I still believe in what I do, despite the fact that sometimes I don't always agree with the journalists that I see.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the future a little bit here. So you've talked about digital media, obviously. You've talked about the internet several times. So how do you see the future of transitional local news evolving, especially at WLWT Channel 5 here in the future?
Well, I mean, look, I can remember working at Channel 19 behind the scenes, my first job out of college, and there wasn't even the internet yet. I was like, there's this thing called the internet. So we've seen it evolve. And I do think that a lot of people, you get your news on your phone. We see it where now we're able to actually track who watches our news on television and then who goes to our website and to read our news stories. So I think that's going to be very important. I think that streaming eventually will also have to carry local news. Right now that's not the way it is, and I think our attorneys eventually will be making a change with that. That you should be able to watch streaming and also have access to your local news channels. But I think there will be fewer places delivering it to you. I don't know that our company, who owns a lot of companies across the country and newspapers and magazines, they think there will always be local news, but there will be fewer outlets giving it to you.
Very good.
Which I hate to see. I love this business, and we're friends with our competition, contrary to what a lot of people think. Yes, we want to win, and yes, we want you to watch us, but I don't want to see any of my fellow news anchors and reporters not have a job. It breaks my heart when I have seen that other people have downsized through COVID and since then. But I think it's a reality.
Yes, very good. Well, this has been Sheree Paolello, news anchor for WLWT, Channel 5 in Cincinnati. Sheree, thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me. It's fun to kind of talk about the business and for hopefully people to get a sense of who I am off the news desk.
Yes, thank you.
Java with Joe has been brought to you by Kemba Credit Union, sponsored in part by First Choice Coffee and Real Vision. Thanks for listening.